It is December 6th, 1917, 9:04 in the morning, Halifax Harbour, Nova Scotia. The French cargo ship Mont-Blanc has been burning for 19 minutes. Railway dispatcher Vince Coleman sits at his telegraph key, 750 yards from the burning vessel. He has already evacuated once, but he came back. The passenger train from St. John is approaching the city, 300 people on board. Coleman knows what nobody else knows. The Mont-Blanc is carrying 2,900 tons of explosives. He taps out his final message. Hold up the train. Ammunition ship afire in harbor making for Pier 6 and will explode. Guess this will be my last message. Goodbye, boys. 35 seconds later, the largest human-made explosion in history vaporizes half of Halifax. This is a story that deserves to be told carefully. Halifax in December 1917 was a city transformed by war. What had been a sleepy maritime town of 50,000 had doubled in size almost overnight. The harbor buzzed with activity 24 hours a day. 50,000 military personnel and civilian workers crowded into neighborhoods that could barely handle half that number. This was the primary convoy assembly point for the entire North Atlantic Theater. Ships loaded with explosives, fuel, and supplies for the Western Front arrived daily, anchored in the harbor, then departed in heavily guarded convoys. The Richmond neighborhood sat right on the harbor's edge, close enough that residents could read the names on passing ships. Vincent Coleman lived here with his wife Frances and their daughter Aileen. At 45, he had worked the railway dispatch office for 19 years. Every morning at 7 a.m., he walked to his office overlooking the harbor's narrows, the bottleneck where all ship traffic had to pass. There is a growing community of people who believe these stories deserve to be told. If you are one of them, subscribe and join us. Coleman was methodical, known for his attention to detail. Train schedules were sacred to him. Passenger safety was everything. From his window, he watched the constant parade of vessels entering and leaving the harbor. Munitions ships, fuel tankers, troop transports. The war had made Halifax the most strategically important port in North America. It had also made it one of the most dangerous places on Earth. What the residents did not fully grasp was that their harbor had become a floating ammunition depot. Ships routinely anchored within sight of their homes carrying enough explosives to level city blocks. There were no warning signs, no public notifications, no evacuation plans. The war demanded secrecy, and secrecy bred complacency. The signs were everywhere, if anyone had been looking. In the 2 years before December 1917, harbor records documented at least 6 near-miss collisions in the Narrows. In August 1917, 2 munitions ships passed within 50 feet of each other. Both captains filed incident reports. Both recommended immediate safety protocol changes. Nothing happened. The harbor operated without centralized traffic control. No mandatory pilot coordination for dangerous cargo vessels. No emergency evacuation protocols, despite handling massive quantities of explosives daily. Multiple government departments had overlapping authority over harbor operations, but no clear chain of command for safety decisions. And that right there is what should have been the warning. Ships carrying enough explosives to destroy half the city routinely anchored near populated areas without public notification. The Mont-Blanc had entered Halifax Harbour on December 5th, carrying a cargo that defied comprehension. 2,300 tons of picric acid, 200 tons of TNT, 35 tons of benzol fuel, 10 tons of gun cotton. Combined, this was equivalent to roughly 2,900 tons of TNT. Enough explosive power to be felt 270 miles away. Despite carrying this massive payload, the Mont-Blanc displayed no warning flags, no markings indicating dangerous cargo. International maritime law required such warnings, but wartime urgency had made corners acceptable to cut. Captain Aimé Lemedec knew his cargo could destroy the entire harbor if anything went wrong. His manifest was known only to harbor officials. The residents of Halifax had no idea they were sleeping next to the largest floating bomb in human history. The Norwegian vessel IMO was scheduled to depart Halifax on the morning of December 6th. But there had been delays, coal loading problems, paperwork issues. By the time the IMO began moving through the harbor, it was later than planned, and the captain was anxious to make up time. Speed and shortcuts, the combination that has destroyed more lives than any natural disaster. 8:45 a.m., December 6th, 1917. The IMO, departing Halifax Harbour, took the wrong side of the channel to avoid a smaller vessel. This put it on a direct collision course with the entering Mont-Blanc in the harbor's narrowest point. Both ships saw each other. Both attempted evasive maneuvers. But miscommunication between the vessels led to both turning in the same direction. At 8:45 and 50 seconds, the IMO's bow struck the Mont-Blanc's starboard side, breaching the benzol fuel tanks. Benzol fuel spread across the Mont-Blanc's deck and ignited immediately. Spectacular flames and black smoke rose from the ship, drawing hundreds of Halifax residents to their windows, docks, and rooftops to watch. They had no idea what they were looking at. The Mont-Blanc crew abandoned ship immediately, rowing frantically toward Dartmouth while shouting warnings in French that few understood. Captain Lemedec later testified he knew the ship would explode within 15 to 20 minutes once the fire reached the cargo holds. He had seen similar fires before. There was no saving the vessel, no putting out the flames. The benzol fuel burned too hot, too fast. But no one on shore understood this. To them, it looked like an ordinary ship fire. Dramatic, but manageable. Fireboats raced toward the Mont-Blanc. Spectators gathered along the waterfront. Vince Coleman had evacuated with other railway workers when the fire started. But then he remembered. The St. John passenger train was approaching the city. 300 people on board. At approximately 9 a.m., Coleman returned to his telegraph office and sent his final message. "Hold up the train. Ammunition ship afire in harbor making for Pier 6 and will explode. Guess this will be my last message. Goodbye, boys." The message reached the train dispatcher in Rockingham just minutes before what happened next. At 9:04 and 35 seconds a.m., the Mont-Blanc exploded with a force equivalent to 2,900 tons of TNT, the largest human-made explosion before nuclear weapons. The pressure wave reached 23,000 miles per hour, instantly killing everyone within a half-mile radius. Had you ever heard of this before today? The explosion created a mushroom cloud that rose over 12,000 feet. It vaporized the Mont-Blanc entirely. The ship's half-ton anchor shaft was found 2 1/3 miles inland. The blast was heard 100 miles away in Prince Edward Island. In Sydney, Nova Scotia, 270 miles away, windows rattled and people felt the ground shake. But these numbers, staggering as they are, cannot capture what happened to Halifax that morning. The explosion instantly killed 1,782 people. 9,000 others were injured. 1,630 buildings were completely destroyed. 12,000 more were damaged beyond immediate repair. 25,000 people were left homeless. The Richmond neighborhood, closest to the blast, was completely obliterated. Where Vince Coleman's dispatch office had stood, there was nothing. Where families had been eating breakfast, there was a 60-foot deep crater filled with seawater. A tsunami wave up to 60 feet high swept the shore clean of structures. Glass fragments blinded hundreds who had been watching the fire from their windows. The human cost is difficult to comprehend. Entire families vanished in an instant. Children walking to school simply disappeared. Workers at the docks were vaporized so completely that no trace of them was ever found. And then, as if the explosion was not enough, nature added its own cruelty. Within hours, temperatures dropped to 10 degrees below zero as a blizzard moved in. Survivors with no shelter, no warm clothing, no medical supplies, faced a winter storm that threatened to finish what the explosion had started. But help was already coming. Within 6 hours of receiving news of the explosion, Massachusetts Governor Samuel McCall organized the first relief train to Halifax. It departed Boston at 10 p.m. on December 6th with medical supplies, doctors, and emergency personnel. Despite the blizzard, it arrived early on December 8th. Boston's response was unprecedented in speed and scope. The Massachusetts Halifax Relief Committee raised $750,000, approximately $15 million in today's currency. They sent multiple relief trains with supplies, medical personnel, and construction materials for temporary shelters. It was international humanitarian aid before such concepts formally existed. The investigation began immediately. The Royal Commission, led by Justice Arthur Drysdale, initially blamed Captain Aimé Lemedec of the Mont-Blanc and harbor pilot Francis Mackey. Both were arrested and imprisoned. But 3 years later, the Supreme Court of Canada overturned these findings, ruling the collision was mutual fault. Lemedec spent 2 years in prison for a disaster that was ultimately deemed accidental. The Halifax explosion changed everything about maritime safety. The disaster exposed critical gaps in international shipping standards that had been ignored for decades. In 1929, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea added new amendments directly inspired by Halifax. Mandatory radio communication protocols for all vessels, traffic separation schemes in busy harbors, specific regulations for ships carrying dangerous cargo. Ships with explosive payloads now had to display warning signals, follow designated shipping lanes, and maintain constant radio contact with harbor authorities. These principles still govern modern shipping safety protocols nearly a century later. Vincent Coleman's sacrifice was not forgotten. His final telegraph message saved 300 lives on the St. John passenger train. He was posthumously awarded the Order of Canada, and a memorial stands where his dispatch office once operated. But perhaps the most enduring symbol of the disaster's legacy began simply. In 1918, Nova Scotia shipped a Christmas tree to Boston as a thank you for the relief efforts. That gesture became an annual tradition that continues today. Each year, Nova Scotia's premier personally selects a massive spruce, usually 40 to 50 feet tall, to be displayed on Boston Common. The tree lighting ceremony draws thousands of spectators and serves as a symbol of international friendship born from tragedy. Prevention is not dramatic, but it saves lives. And this is the pattern I keep seeing in these stories. The same urgency that drives progress can also drive us past the safety measures that make that progress sustainable. In Halifax, the urgency of war made corner-cutting acceptable until those cut corners killed nearly 2,000 people. Yet despite being the largest human-made explosion before Hiroshima, the Halifax explosion remains largely unknown outside Atlantic Canada. Wartime censorship initially limited news coverage. The ongoing battles of World War I overshadowed the disaster. Unlike other maritime disasters, it lacked the international passenger manifest that made the Titanic a global story. These are the stories we owe it to the victims to remember. If this video taught you something you did not know before, leave a comment and tell me what surprised you most. And if you want to see more forgotten disasters that shape the safety standards we rely on today, subscribe. Because there are more stories like this. Stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things in impossible circumstances. Stories that remind us that the price of progress is eternal vigilance. This video is presented for educational purposes. We have relied on official reports, news coverage, and public records in telling this story.